Welcome to Ethical Worldview, Unit 1 Intro. I'm Dr. Martin Dunlap, and I'll be your instructor for the next 8 weeks. I'm going to try to talk about why we study ethics. Moral concerns are unavoidable in life. Given the nature of man, concerns related to morality and ethical behavior will always be a part of life. One way to look at it is with this analogy. Morality is a lot like nutrition. Principal concerns related to nutrition is health. Principal concern related to ethics and morality is moral health. There are many experts, either self-appointed or culturally accepted, who point us in different ways of thinking. An important aspect of these discussions is disagreement, which is healthy for continued growth both intellectually and ethically. So what about moral health? As stated, the goal of ethical reflection is moral health. Thus, we seek to determine what will nourish our moral life and what will poison it. In the days and weeks ahead, hopefully, you will be challenged to reflect on your moral and ethical health. Morality is considered a first-order set of beliefs and practices about how to live a good life. We all make decisions based on what we believe and how we behave when solving life issues from a developed moral system. Ethics, then, is a second-order, conscious reflection on the adequacy of our moral beliefs. In other words, does what we believe and practice actually work for us in all situations? Or do we need to make adjustments to improve our ethical system? Ethics is always an ongoing conversation. The process of how we work through moral issues is called an ethical system. We must know that arguments exist. There is very little consensus in society today. The existence of conflicting views does not necessarily mean that there is no ethical truth. We can read and participate in professional discussions of ethical issues in journals and other forum settings. We come back to ideas again and again, finding new meaning in them. An interesting side note about this ongoing conversation in today's society is the concept of political correctness. Is it possible that profitable and valuable ethical discussion is avoided because we are afraid to say what we believe for fear it might offend someone? If this is the case, we leave ourselves open as a society to following the accepted beliefs without any conversation as to whether they're acceptable to everyone or not. Theory in life. When we finish this course, are we going to be good ethicists? It is hard to define what good ethicist means. We are all capable of thinking and deciding for ourselves. The depth of thinking and decision-making is related to each person's effort to learn and understand that many possibilities for making decisions that can determine the direction of one's life. If we want to make good ethical decisions, we need a solid ethical process. The issue is not whether we have an ethical theory, but whether we are conscious of the theory we do have and believe it is the best available guide for our lives. If ethical truth really exists, will we agree on it? Are there rules that are valid for all people at all times? An ethical worldview consists of a set of beliefs and assumptions about how the world fits together. As with all ethical systems, everyone has a worldview, whether it is acknowledged or not. What we do accept as ultimate reality. What do we accept as ultimate reality? For many it is God, and from that premise, all truth, which leaves little room for discussion. If a person believes that God does not exist, or that his existence is irrelevant to ethics, this opens an issue of where right and wrong come from. We need to recognize that in every ethical system, there is a connection between a concept of ultimate reality and the origin of right and wrong. Although we have a lot in common with the animal world, human nature separates us. We have a freedom to make decisions, be rational, be spiritually sensitive and aware, which is derived from a quantitatively more complex neurophysiology. Ethics, then, deals with human beings. Ethicists disagree on almost everything except that humans have a problem. We misbehave and are not where we need to be in an ethical and moral sense. If we did everything right, there would be no need for ethics. Since ethicists cannot determine what the problem is, we have multiple ethical theories, each presenting a possible explanation for our human nature. So we have some ways to look at this. We could be open-minded about the content of ethics and see how it applies to us. Or we can be a cynic, which is kind of a cheap position. We don't allow people to have fairness of all the options or the convictions that certain people may have. Or we can search for the truth. Truthfulness, goodness, and rightness need to characterize not only our conclusions, but also the means by which we get to our conclusions. And if there's any place where Christians should be honest, it is the ethical process. So let's talk a little bit here for a few minutes about the ethics of teaching, the book that you will be reading by Strike and Solstice. And I would suggest that you will have read chapter 1 before you go any further in this discussion. There are many ethical theories we could explore in this course. And in this past course, which was just an ethics course, before we made it an ethical worldview course, we did spend a lot of time in 10 different ethical theories. However, for purposes of discussion for this course, we will adopt the Strike and Solstice consequential, non-consequential conceptual framework. For a consequentialist, decision maker pays more attention to the effects, outcomes, or consequences of their decision. For the non-consequentialist, decision maker regards duty, obligation, and or principle as more important than consequences. And you can read about it on page 3. As you read chapter 1, you will discover several helpful statements that clarify the beliefs and help us build a foundation for making our ethical decisions. Now, here are some of the statements that Strike and Solstice make in the book. Moral judgments are not, therefore, statements of preference or taste. That's on page 7. But moral judgments are statements of obligation or duty. That's on page 7. Another statement, they believe the tendency to lump ethical judgments under the general class of value judgments and then treat all value judgments alike is the source of much confusion about ethics. You'll read about that on page 7 also. We must not be seduced by the label value into thinking that all value judgments are matters of arbitrary choice and that there is no right or wrong about them. Then the last statement that I want you to think about is, there are other possibly good reasons to be suspicious about the objectivity of ethical judgments. Now, those statements, if you think about them and read the book, or especially page 7 in the book, it can be confusing. So if you are confused by the seeming contradiction that can be argued to exist between the quotes above and earlier on page 5 in the book, which talks about a kind of rational thinking, you have a lot of company. Dr. George Crawford, esteemed KU education professor emeritus, thinks, as do I, that there is an unresolved tension between the two, objective and rational, or subjective and value, positions, these two positions, that is sufficiently ambiguous or ambivalent as to be confusing to a careful reader. So if you get confused when you read 4 and 5, now what are they saying? There's a reason for that confusion, because some people view ethics as totally objective and rational, others view it as subjective and attached to values. So a question that's intended to lead to clarification given the ought nature of ethics. And if you read the book, you know they talk about the ought. Ethics is what we ought to do, what we ought to think, how we ought to act. The ought nature of ethics, morals, and ethical decision-making, do you think it is either possible or desirable to act as if ethical considerations can or should be treated as nothing other than inherently value-laden and value-based? In other words, do you believe that all ethical decisions you may make are based on your values? You may want to think about that. I do not believe that, nor does Dr. Crawford. And the reason we don't is because judgment is necessary for anyone who wants or needs to make any kind of decision. So judgment is necessary because it is the behavior that allows us to choose wisely and effectively between and among competing values. All values are not created equal. Make no mistake about that. Some may be, but not all. Arsenic will not have the same effect on a baby's formula as sugar. Neither will failing to look both ways before crossing the street have the same effect on health and well-being as will vigilance. It is helpful to remember that some decisions are in fact either-or decisions, one thing or another. Other decisions, however, are not either-or, they are rather both-and decisions. Both one thing and another, both good and bad, perhaps. The latter kinds are called paradoxical. They are simultaneously both one thing and another. Dr. Crawford offers this opinion on this matter. It's better to not get sidetracked into unhelpful debates about whether it's always, usually, sometimes, or never possible to be completely, substantially, or only partially objective in making ethical decisions. Many of us will conclude that insights about these kinds of issues will often be gained by recognizing that it depends on various factors: the context, the participants, the quality of conflict, and yes, consequences. My own provisional resting place on this matter is this. It may be helpful to entertain the possibility that relativism and absolutism still have practical and useful roles to play in our consideration of professional ethics and ethical decision-making. Utilitarianism notwithstanding, when we find ourselves saying or thinking, "I will always," or "I will never," we might serve ourselves and those with whom we work better if we pause and ask, will there ever be an exception? Right is sometimes clearly distinguishable from wrong, but not always. You as teachers will never serve your responsibilities better, I think, if you have pretty clear ideas about your own values. I've found it helpful over the years to think of my values in terms of dying places, as in, what would I literally do if necessary? Die for. What is that important? I encourage you to think about this also as you consider how you'll become more effective in the realm of professional ethics and/or ethical moral decision-making. Understand, you make ethical decisions on a daily basis. Sometimes you don't know that. Having an understanding of why and how you make those decisions and how you can work to better understand that will be of value to you. You might begin by reflecting on whether there are values you regard as absolutely non-negotiable, or there are negotiable, or they're matters of indifference. Now, this lengthy introduction to the Strike and Solstice Ethics of Teaching book helps set the stage for the discussions that you will be having in the next few weeks. I think you will find it very stimulating as you consider the cases presented and the discussions that follow. It can also be frustrating because there are no completely right answers to many of the questions that arise. So enjoy.